Well, welcome to another Discover Headless Tech interview from headlesscreator.com. I'm Marcelo Lewin, the Headless Creator. As always, you can get a hold of me, Marcelo, at headlesscreator.com. By the way, happy Valentine's Day to those of you that celebrate around the world. I hope you enjoy your day. Today's episode is a continuation of the previous episode, and we were talking about finding the balance between a monolith and composable architecture with my guest, Claes Justesen, digital marketing and commerce director at Deloitte. So today we're going to continue that conversation. We're going to finish it off, actually. But before we get started, you know how this works. You have to go get your free account at headlesscreator.com. Get your free account. You'll have access to this podcast. But you'll also have access to the entire course, actually. And that course gives you pretty much everything we have in there. Upcoming interviews and tutorials, tons of tutorials, lots of podcast episodes, bonus material. You also have access to the entire site, which gives you all the courses. We have lots of them. Content Modeling Weekly, the Discover Headless Tech, this one, the Retrospective, Beginner's Guide to DHTp, weekly tip courses, lots of headless CMS courses. So if you want to learn how to implement a headless CMS, both from a author's perspective, a administrator's perspective, or a developer perspective, these are the ones you want to check out. So anyway, go get your free account. It's 100% free, and you'll learn a lot. And for those of you watching live, remember that you can put in questions in the chat, and I'll ask Claes those questions. So without further ado, let's bring him in. Claes, welcome. Glad to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So where are you located for those that didn't watch part one?
So I'm located in Denmark, in Copenhagen.
Okay, cool. And what's the weather like over there? It's pretty cold here for LA.
Pretty gray. It's like, we go in Celsius, right? So it's 5 degrees Celsius and gray weather. So it's like that, almost most part of the winter is like that. So
yeah, we're running cold here. And I'm not sure what the Celsius is, but we're about 50 Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
So, which is pretty cold for LA. I mean, for the rest of the country, especially the East Coast, it's nothing, right? That's like summer for them. But for us, it's cold. So anyway, glad to have you back. People can learn a lot more details about you on part one, because we did a pretty long interview there with you. But just a real quick recap of your background in technology or with Deloitte. So maybe tell us real quick what you're doing there today.
I have a background as a developer starting out in 2004, and then doing a lot of solution architecture, technical project management, and then basically delivering a lot of e-commerce solutions in B2C, B2B for the past, I think that started around 10. So for the past 12 years. And then in 21, I changed to Deloitte, where I head up the Danish part of the marketing and commerce offering, you can say, in Deloitte Digital.
And that's where you're seeing probably a lot about composable architectures, right? Especially in commerce.
Yeah, I think it's of course here, but also everywhere it's happening, right? So it's something that is a hot topic these days, right? So a lot of us is discussing it. I've also talked about it with a lot of my old colleagues as well, and the people in the community. So yeah, a lot is happening in that space.
Yeah, definitely. Now, one thing I didn't ask you last time was, what's your hobby? What do you do for fun? We got to know that.
Yeah, I play in a band, actually.
Oh, no kidding.
My old high school band is still active a little bit. We don't go out as much, but we play all of the stuff that nobody wants to hear, that only we think is cool still, right? So yeah.
So what instrument?
I play the bass.
Oh, okay. Very cool. So you've always done the bass?
Yeah, no, I think it was, when we started out the band, I was, I played the guitar, right? But then the other guitarist, he was better than me, right? So I was like, okay, so I grabbed the bass.
Yeah, awesome. I envy guys like you. I wish I had musical talent, but I can only listen to music. That's about it. I'm just horrible at it.
It's never too late, right?
What's that?
It's never too late to get started.
I tried with the piano, and I don't know, these fingers, they don't want to do the walking. I'm not sure. But maybe. I have to try harder. That's what it is. All right, let's get started. Real quick, let's bring everybody up to speed. here we're going to end up with the balance between having a composable architecture and a monolith, because most companies have that. But before we jump into that balance, which is how we're going to close out this interview, give us a quick recap of what do we consider a monolith and what do we consider a composable?
Yeah, so so you can say from the top, you can say composable is the ability to basically take different capabilities and then compose them together in one user experience, right? So that you pick and choose the capabilities from the vendors that you want, and then you basically stitch them together in a good experience. So that's in essence what composable means, right? Whereas as monolith, on the other hand, is where we come from originally in the business, right? That is, it's typically one data model and one code base, and then it serves different areas, business areas with that one data model and that code base. But then of course it's intertwined in the way it works. So you cannot pick and choose. There's one offering, you can say, with what's in the box.
Right. So give an example of a monolith system and a composable system, so people have an understanding, where they fall.
Yeah, so you can say that a composable system could be something like a commerce tools, content stack, contentful, whereas commerce tools serve just commerce, contentful serves just CMS and content, right? And then you could basically stitch it together the way you want, and it's API enabled with a Mac approach, right? And that would be examples of composable, right? Whereas on the monolith side, you could have traditional, you can say platforms like Salesforce. I would consider monolith, of course, and the same goes with the SAP for that matter, or if you look at Adobe as well. Of course, they are headlessly enabling themselves. So they are adding the ability to basically be API first, and they are getting into that, but they are still like based on largely the same data model and you can say the same code base.
Could we say that a monolith also tries to be a suite as opposed to very focused, like you mentioned, contentful, focused on content management, right?
Exactly.
Whereas a monolith is, like you said, AEM or Salesforce. It's a suite of tools. Even though they're trying to go headless, it's still a suite of tools.
Exactly. It's still a suite of tools. And I think that some of them have, been starting from building out basically just one capability area, right? But then they have expanded over the years. And sometimes that expansion has been, growing the monolith itself, but sometimes also by acquisition, right? And then when acquiring different companies, trying to integrate them more into the monolith and the way it works, right? So and that constitutes sort of like a suite of capabilities, if you will, right? But they haven't started out with the Mac approach. You could have one company essentially, right, owning a different variety of Mac oriented products, right, which you could compose the way you want, but that's not how they came about, which is why they are not architected that way, right?
Right. Okay, so let's jump into finding the balance, because in most companies, you're going to have a mixture of a monolith and probably bringing in a headless CMS or a headless commerce tool or a DAM or whatever it may be. So to me, one of the most important things is data modeling, content modeling, because that's sort of the basis of everything, right? How is that balance? How do you strike that balance in when you may have an AEM and a contentful and a Cloudinary all in one organization?
Yeah, exactly. And that it's not an easy task, right? But I think what I think composable has a hard time doing is serving the back office business users in the right way, and I think that's still something we need to tackle. And I think and that is where in essence the monoliths works really well, right? Because you can operate within the same you can say view. You have the full data set across the full data model readily available and can use that, and you have what you see, what you can get kind of interaction with what you're doing. So I think that's the strength of the monolith a large extent, right? And easy to configure and easy to make work. And then whereas on the other hand, composable has a little bit of a drawback in that area, but as we'd also discussed last time, you're really quickly enabled to deploy, new capabilities, new features very fast, and you can change, the user experience over time without changing everything that is underneath the hood, which is a super strength. So how could you combine these two things? Right. And I think it's a little bit about thinking about, pace layering a little bit and looking into, so in which area do you want to move the quickest, right? And that's usually the area where you want to adapt fastest is usually, as close to the consumer or customer, right? So in those interface and those touch points, that's usually what changes gradually over time, right? So you're constantly trying to keep up with consumer and customer demand. So you need to be able to change that very flexible over time. So that is where composable really fits, and that would be, of course, your e-commerce website on your content and these kind of things like your CMS. Whereas if you flip more to the to sort of things like a CRM, like a customer service and these kind of things, which is of course has customer touch point, but not directly, right? Whereas it's much more the business users that uses these capabilities. So in that space, and they sit a little bit lower in the pace mindset, right? So in the layering, so the ability to move fast in sales is not something that is so important, because it's not like every day you change your CRM system and the way that your account management team works, and the same goes for customer service, right? So I think the balance and the sweet spot sits somewhere in between. That you look into, is this, how fast do you want to basically be able to change this part of your architecture? And if the answer is that we need to be able to change this many times a year, then you need to be able to. Then I think you need to look more into the composable way of doing things. Whereas, but every half year or every quarter we do some small changes, but basically we are in a more of a steady state, because this is how we do business, right? Internally. Then okay, maybe it's not a problem, right? Maybe it's not a problem. Maybe you don't need to remove everything and create a composable solution there. So I think it's also about trying to balance these two areas against each other, and figuring out how fast is it really that you want to move in this space, and so on.
And then change that system to a composable system. Now, from a content modeling, I want to continue a little bit on that, because to me, what's really important is single source of truth, which allows you to maintain your content, right, much easier, and make changes quicker. So in a enterprise that you have to balance it between a headless CMS and Salesforce, how do you, and you may have content that's important on both, how do you maintain that single source of truth in that kind of balance system? I mean, it seems like it would be a bit hard.
Yeah, so I think it depends on which kind of content, right? So I think there's there's product information that usually sits in your PIM system, right? And that should be your single source of truth on product, right? That is usually hooked onto a CDN of some sort, where you deliver your images and your videos from, and maybe you also feed that product information into your CRM system. So something in those lines are probably handled a little bit on the backend integrations, which making sure that it's fed into the right channels and can be used. I think then there is the bit about, if you look into something like customer information, right? That usually sits, the source of truth and the master record for that would usually be in your CRM system / customer service system, right? That this is where your customer sits, right? And then it's of course the balance between how much do you integrate on the back end, and how much do you stitch together in your composable architecture. Because I think my personal take on it is that I think we will see that these monoliths like Adobe or Salesforce and so on, they will start publishing APIs, and they will start being more, maybe not composable, but much more headless in the way that they operate, which is a good thing. And I think that that if you have a suite already, right? If you have a CMS system that is not natively composable, then if you have the ability to surface some of that information from that system, then you could stitch it together, right? If you want to augment product, you have some product information, you could basically connect that in the front end, or you could connect it through a backend integration. That's a little bit, it depends on what kind of landscape you sit with. Yeah.
I think it's important also for an enterprise to actually look at their content and make sure that you're not duplicating, like you said, customer information in their CMS and customer information in the CRM and content information in the CRM and the CMS, right? So maybe striking the balance is also analyzing the way they're doing business with content today, and starting to do some cleanup, because that's where you're going to get the best, I think.
Yeah, and I think if you look at something like you can say segmentation or personalization that is based on the user and stuff like that, so there's different ways of going about that, right? Maybe you want to make a little bit more segment rule-based personalization on the content you create in your CMS system. So maybe you feed in, not mastering, but feeding like a copy of your user segments from your CRM system, and then you tag on the product information to that and publish that. Or you remove that layer, like some of the DXCs are doing, and take that layer and push it in to sort of the composable part of the stack, and then you stitch it together there, right? So that the content is connected to the user in sort of the composable part of the layer instead, right? And that depends, and that's of course, I think that's the direction it would take. But I think there could be a roadmap to getting there, right? That you could introduce composability in some areas and then working your way towards being more flexible at the end, right?
Introducing this composability to bring that balance also introduces sort of a paradigm shift in thinking in the enterprise of how things are implemented, how content is managed. What are your thoughts on that? How do you start bringing that balance to the enterprise and that change in thinking?
I think the way to bring it is to maybe a little bit by example, and look at what how well has it gone, in your monolithic projects, right? So if you look back, guys, and you did the last project and the last project, how many years did it take to roll that out, and so on and so forth? So maybe, and I guess a large portion of that experience will be it took a long time, it wasn't easy. So maybe in the space where you're not that, maybe you have the worst experiences, and maybe you also have the ability to experiment a little bit because it's not that core business. Maybe you have a small user segment that wants to engage with you on an e-commerce channel in one market or something like that. Mm-hmm. Maybe you pick that out and say, hey guys, let's do a proof of concept with where we deliver it on in a composable fashion, and see how fast we can deliver that, and then learn and test with the users we have there, and then gain that experience, that and then so it's lower risk for the enterprise to engage in. Is just these customers and just this market with just these products maybe, and then you start testing it out, and then you use that as you can say a reference for bringing it into more business critical places in the enterprise, or maybe expanding it to different user segments or different markets. At least that's how I've seen some of these things work in terms of proof of concepting and in a low risk kind of environment.
Yeah, I like that strategy where basically you're looking at your pain points of your monolith and saying, okay, how can the composable architecture help there? And then start creating prototypes and start rolling that out. I think that's a great way of doing it, instead of thinking, oh, we're migrating everything and it's going to take a year, and then it either doesn't get done or it fails because of whatever reason. I've been on plenty of projects where $1 million was spent and nothing got delivered, because it just.
Exactly. And then I think another, point to make is that we are at least seeing a lot of enterprises also understanding, the importance of user centricity, also in the B2B space, that you actually need to be user centric and you actually need to understanding that importance of the customer centricity, right? And working with that. And what usually then is the next step in that direction is to say, okay, so we start with the user experience basically. So, and starting with the user experience is basically the opposite than opening the lid of a monolith and saying what does it have in the box. So you start with the experience, and then you figure out what capabilities you need to basically make that experience run the right way, and that is usually different different capabilities from different vendors that you end up with figuring out is the right way forward, right? And that if you apply, proof of concept from one end, and then that way of thinking, which is also shifting, I think, in the industry, then you end up having, it will equal composability, right? That will be the answer of how to drive that forward, right?
Yep. So let's talk a little bit about the user experience from the authoring point of view, right? Because that is extremely important, because these are the people that work with content day in and day out. And in an enterprise where you have to strike the balance between a monolith, which, without argument, they have the best WYSIWYG experience, as you said, for authors, right? Much easier. The negatives, of course, is that they're mixing design with their content in this monolith, and then when they try to publish that to a non-web channel, we run into issues. But on the headless CMS side, you've got the ability to not mix all this up, deliver to all the channels, but the authoring experience is a bit more complex. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 more clicks than it does in a monolith, which people say, oh, 2 or 3 more clicks is not a big deal, but you multiply that times 1,000 to 2,000 times a day they're entering content or managing content, it's a huge deal. How do you present a good authoring experience, taking into consideration how authors work, meaning like maybe starting with Google Docs, not even with any CMS, right?
Yeah.
How do you take that into, what do you do there? Because you have a balance, right? And you have all these systems. You have the CRM system, you have the DAM system. How do you do that for an author? And then I have my opinion too, because full disclosure, I work for Uniform. But we'll get to that after.
But I think that is that could be part of the answer is companies DXCs like Uniform and Fantastic and some of the other vendors in the space, right? That they are basically trying to create what we had in the old days, like in a CMS, right? So basically a CMS for headless, if you will. So basically having the ability to orchestrate what components you want where and placing them a little bit more WYSIWYG. So I think that's one element. I think another element is so basically what you want to do as an author is you want to see what it looks like, right? You want to basically being really fast to see, okay, so I've created this content, what would it look like to the end customer? What would it look like on mobile? What would it look on desktop and so on? So I think it's also about you could be diligent about creating some good authoring Q&A environments, right? Similar to your production environment, but where you can play around with it really fast. That's also a way to do it, right? So you test it out there and no one's going to see it. And because it's instantly deployable because you create it, then you can see it. Then there's also, you could test stuff out in those environments. So it's also a little bit about how you set up your different tests and QA environments internally, right? You could also work with that, maybe in the lack of a DXC, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. Using a DXCP like Uniform, full disclosure, again, I work for Uniform. But we are one of the few, if not the only, with all the capabilities of orchestration and separating design content from domain content, which to me is extremely important to do if you really want to have clean content out there. But I think part of I don't know, I'd like your take on this. to me, part of the striking the balance is re-educating authors too. You mentioned they want to see what it looks like. But why do they want to see what it looks like? Why does it even matter to them what it looks like? To them, it should be content. And is the content correct? Is it up to date? Is it valuable? And then let the channels decide what it looks like, because it's going to look one way today. And in 6 months, when we redesign everything, it's going to look a different way. So does it really matter? So how do you do that with authors?
Yeah, I think it's about also, I think there's a kind of a trust, right? You need to trust the system also.
Exactly.
So you need to trust that it works. And I think that if you build that trust early on, and so they understand that, okay, I can publish this, and then the first couple of times I will check what it looks like with the third and the fourth and the X number of time, I don't need to, because I know it'll work. So I think that's also a part of the answer, that you build up that trust that it actually looks good if you just do this and that. And then I think the element of you wanting it to be what you see is what you get will gradually decline, right? That you just change your text and publish, and then off you go. So I think that's one element of it, and then I think it's about them getting used to it, like everything else, right? That the world changes, and it also does in the CMS landscape, and you just need to see that maybe it's not that bad, and maybe you get some added bonus benefits, right? So if typically the people involved in publishing the content is also the people that are responsible of making sure that we deliver the right both content but also features to the customers, and they typically sit in the same team and so on. So I think that they will be happy about the fact how fast we now can publish new features and make them available for the customers. So that maybe outweighs the fact that it's not reviewed, because I think in the old days where you changed like what you see is what you get on the screen, not almost directly on the website, I think that is a little less important if you just can have a good, strong preview functionality that works really well. So you just click preview and you can see it works well, and then you preview, see it works well. I think that makes up for a lot of it, and that what you see is what you get experience. Almost changing the HTML directly is a little bit flash, and maybe it's not the most productive way of doing it. At least I've seen back in the old days, the experienced content authors, they didn't use that what you see is what you get feature, because they knew it would work. They just used preview if they were in doubt, 10% of the time.
Yeah. I mean, I would argue that as developers don't end up worrying what things are going to look like, because they're worried on the code and setting up the code. The UX people, the designers, are the ones that worry, what is this going to look like, and work with developers to set up templates. I would make the argument the same thing for content authors, is don't worry about what it looks like. Make sure we have the best content, the best up-to-date content, the most value through this content, and use the templates provided to you. But now that's the key, right? It's setting up all these templates, and also setting up the flexibility to be able to change things around within a box still. I personally don't believe in the free form for all, the old days where you can just move it 2 pixels, because what does that mean? It means nothing to, an IoT device or a newsletter or an SMS message where you're going to be reusing this content. Do you agree? Or
I agree. I think that the most successful CMS projects, also on Monolith, which is basically, it's the same problem, right? But I've been involved with has been where we have been really structured about which fields, which templates you have. And the more you can make those fields a non-rich text editor, the better. So the more structured that data is, the easier it is, both for the authors not to make mistakes, basically, and to trust that it will be published in the right way. So I think that is where I've seen the best outcome, is where you basically work with those. It's better to then create a new template, right? Instead of just saying, you just get a rich text field. Then you can just go nuts, because that'll just end up, then it breaks on this device or whatever, right? Because you've introduced a break tag or the wrong diff or something like that, right?
Right. And I can't blame authors, because I know for many years they've used WordPress and all these others where you've mixed up design and everything. But I always tell, and it's an uphill battle, and I get it. I mean, I'm not, putting down authors at all for wanting to control that. But at the end of the day, they need to focus on the value the content provides and the intent of the content and the content itself.
Yeah.
The rest of it should be decided by the delivery channels. But I think I've done enough of this.
No, I agree. I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I hope I don't get any hate letters, but it's okay. I love my content authors. I just, we all need a little bit of thinking, change of our thinking, right?
Yeah.
So you are not advocating for get rid of your monolith, just go fully composable.
No. I think it needs to be assessed, right? I think you need to look at what you have, and maybe your existing monolith is already publishing new APIs that could work in a headless way. I think go user experience first, go customer first, right? What customer centricity and what is the customer's experience and what is it that you want to bring to the customer? And then figure out if, okay, maybe I have a really bad system over here to serve the content. So maybe I need a new CMS. Okay, of course, then consider a composable CMS. I would do that. But maybe I actually have one of the leaders in the space, and maybe they've already published a lot of APIs that could be leveraged to move in a composable direction, right? So that you start with but don't let yourself get pushed into, okay, we will go monolith first, so looking at the abilities that has, and then building the customer experience from that. Build the customer experience from the customer and down, and then see if you have some of the capabilities already on your existing setup, then okay, then start with that, right? But you take control of the customer experience, and you take control, and you basically build your front end, your React app or whatever, however you build it, you build that like you would a composable website, right? Or e-commerce store, whatever you're building. And then look at what capabilities you need, and maybe some of those come from a monolith, and maybe some of them come from one of the composable platforms that you need to buy to make sure you can accommodate for the full customer experience end to end.
So, and that's in an enterprise that has a mixture of systems. The best way, as you mentioned, is look at the places where things change the most and try to make those composable, and then start striking the balance. If a company wants to start out fresh, is your take on that what? Composable, monolith, a mixture of both?
It's a good question. Nobody starts out fresh, but I think
right.
I think it's a really good question. I think I would start to explore composable, but I think it really much depends on what you're trying to achieve, right? Because if you're a startup and you need a web shop, right? I would use Shopify. I would just how many people are with 2 guys? Okay, start with Shopify and start publishing your products and getting some revenue in, right? And then when you start to get challenged on the customer experience, because you cannot do this and you cannot do that and you cannot do this, then start exploring, okay, what would it take for us to create that experience? And I think that answer will be in a composable direction probably. But I think it very much depends on what's the size of the company and how do you start off. But picking the right tool for the battle, I think is the right way to go. And it's not like it is necessarily cheap, for a startup to do a composable solution, right? So I think it depends a little bit on where you are. But if you're a medium size or larger size company that has the opportunity to start from fresh, I would definitely consider, looking into composable, especially in the consumer/customer facing channels. I would start there and see if that would work, and then looking into the more you go downstream in terms of CRM, ERP, and so on. Then of course you will hit the monolith at some point in time. But then of course you look into having the right integration abstraction layers put in place between it, right, to make sure that you sort of are flexible, and then whenever they change the ERP, it's basically not something that hits you because it's abstracted away on microservice level, right?
Yeah. So at the end of the day, you are recommending sort of a balance because, and it makes sense with certain monoliths, right? You can get started immediately just because they have templates and stuff. But as you grow, you're going to run into that wall of like, well, we need to do this and we can't, or we're not scaling, right? Now, certain monoliths, we're not naming names, but are expensive. So it's not really a cost savings, right? If you're going to go, let's say, with a WordPress, we can get for free and install it somewhere. Okay, great, or
Yeah,
Shopify entry level, whatever.
yeah,
But as if you go into a big monolith, it's going to cost you a lot of money. At that point, you might want to even consider composable systems and paying for the team versus paying for the software.
yeah. And I think exactly, but I think it depends on also, are you if you're a global corporation and the level of support from workflows and stuff like that in the back office, or let's say your CMS system, how advanced does that need to be, sharing of global versus local data and so on in your content
Right.
stream? That is of course also a requirement you need to take into consideration, making sure that even though if you choose a composable CMS, that it has those abilities, because that's where I sometimes see, it's more focused on content authoring, not so much on, running a global content team of, let's say, 80 people or something like that across the
Right.
globe. So I think that's also something to at least make sure that you assess, so you fully understand what the requirements are. But yes, I think that there's definitely an opportunity, especially if you are like in I would say mid market, that where you have enough customer you can say pressure to basically create a better and better customer experience, but you are not so intertwined and in a global corporation where it can be much harder to create a revolution like that. So I think that I think we will see a lot of composability come out of that mid-market segment, because they sort of have the funds to do it, but they also have the flexibility to move easier, and decision making is not that hard, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. Yeah. We're pretty much at the end here, but you mentioned being global, right? To me, that's localization is extremely important, and I think that to me that's a huge strength of composable systems, is the ability to localize. Because when people think localization, they think translation, but localization is more than translation. It also involves all your media assets,
Yeah,
videos, images, and not just the text in the images, but the images, the way you represent one image in one culture may be offensive to a different culture, so you have to use a different kind of image, right?
yeah.
So to close up this conversation, how do you strike the balance there where in typical a monolith may not be the best at supporting that kind of localization that's needed, where, or do you disagree with that? I'd love to hear your take on that.
I think you can make a model that support that. I don't see why not. I think that there is I'm not sure. I think that there is a big distinction in that sense. I think composable can do it as well, really well. I think, but I also have seen implementation on monolith. I think it has to do with your operating model. So how are you set up organizationally also, right? So if you have a center of excellence globally somewhere that basically runs all the development and all that kind of thing, and then you only have like satellites around the globe that just need to feed off the way that you're doing business on global level, then it makes a lot of sense to have a really strong supporting organization, and also system and way of workflows and stuff like that, that you only need to change your stuff in specifically your part of it, right? Whereas if you have a little bit more autonomy, the more autonomy you have local, I think composability would make more and more sense, because then you could basically have the same perceived customer experience. It's the same website, right? But you hit it in a different region or in a different country, and the what is driven behind it is basically up to the individual local department to control a little bit, right? So I think that then it makes more sense. So I think it really depends on how you're set up also organizationally if you're a large company.
Excellent. Yep, definitely. Claes, it's been a pleasure. I love this conversation. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with the community. I really appreciate that. If people want to get a hold of you, is the email address the best way, or anything else you'd like to share?
Definitely. I try to reply to all my emails, even though it's sometimes it's a hard thing to do. Yeah,
definitely. Well, Claes, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And thanks to the rest of you. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Discover Headless Tech podcast. And stay tuned for many more coming up soon. So I will see you on the next episode. Cheers, everybody.